That's the heart of the gospel. We use the gospel in America to describe a whole host of things, and most of the time it looks very little like Jesus and a whole lot like you or me or our core beliefs. The American gospel, things we have believed to be good and true. Blessed are the powerful. Blessed are those who will win. Blessed are the mighty. We often build up and elevate people and positions to something they should not be. I have, as you probably know, a preschooler. And I have learned a very dangerous thing with having a preschooler. My kids' school, like many schools, provides the preschoolers a whole host of positions of responsibility throughout the week. They might be the weather person, whose job it is to literally walk outside and go, "It looks like it's raining," as they're getting poured on. They have positions of the person who holds the door or the person who helps make sure everything's put away. And there's one position in particular that has created havoc in my household: the line leader. You guys know how this works, right? One kid is assigned the role of leading the rest of the class. They get to be at the front of the line, and whoever has that role, it's like the almighty and all-powerful, I am in control wherever the teacher leads me. And the problem is, my 4-year-old thinks that those same responsibilities exist at home as well. And so when we go to the zoo or we go to the store, wherever we go, there's this race to be the one in front. Even if he has no idea where he's going, he has to be the one who leads. And if we tell him right now it's not your turn, right now you need to follow, right now you're not the one in control, let me tell you, I think we're at World War VI or VII based on the meltdowns that have happened now. The total loss of all ability to function because he's no longer the line leader, a fake position that doesn't really mean a lot in the grand scheme of things. But I think for most of us, we have that little preschooler inside of us. Even for introverts who love to be the back of the room and hardly notice, there is a longing within us to be the one who sets the pace, to be the one others look to and look up to be the one who has influence and power and the ability to make change. Every one of us, I think, wants to see the world look different. But unfortunately, in our American gospel, we have made power a status symbol. If you have power, you must be doing something right. And we have equated the need to pursue power with all kinds of wrong things. Some of you this last week participated in our democracy, and some of you participated by voting. And perhaps you went to vote because you felt it was your obligation, and so I have to do this even if I don't want to. And perhaps you went to vote because you had great confidence in the individual you were voting for, or the agendas or platforms you stood behind. Perhaps you went to vote out of necessity for fear. What if the other wins? Perhaps you skipped voting altogether because you said, does it even make a difference? See, we live in a country that has given power to you and me in a democracy. We place the people in the place of power, but it's not a true democracy because you and I are only sort of in power. We have a republic, others elect on our behalf, and so you and I are given this illusion of power, and sometimes it can be a terrifying thing. What if I do the wrong choice? What if my neighbor votes differently than me? What if my spouse and I don't agree on what the right next step is? Then what happens to our household? What if I think the whole system's broken and I don't know how to change it? See, we in the American gospel have elevated power to be the ultimate aim. If you have it, then everything will be okay. And if you don't have it, just keep aspiring to get it. And then one day it'll be okay. See, this is nothing new, though, because all of history has been built upon seeking to establish some sort of structure. Who has power? In fact, if you remember in the Old Testament, all the Israelites looked around them and they saw all the other empires that had kings, and they said, "We want a king." And God warned them, "No, you don't. This king will abuse and take advantage. This monarchy will not be what you think. And even their good and righteous king, David, had bloodshed on his hand, and there was all kinds of war, and he raped and he killed, and he was not that good and righteous. All throughout history, we've created systems of power. Who can decide? Democracies and monarchies and theocracies, all sorts of things. Some would just prefer anarchy. They say that's probably the best. I don't know that it is, giving every person power. We have systems of economics, capitalism and communism and socialism and all sorts of different things, monopolies and oligopolies and all kinds of things, just to decide who gets to be in control. At the end of the day, they're all exactly the same. Now, there are nuances and differences of what structure of government we submit ourselves to, but at the end of the day, they're all about who gets to be the one who makes decisions, who gets to have the power to change the world, who gets to be elevated to that preschool position of line leader. And in the grand scheme of things, none of it really matters. Because all authority under this earth, all authority on this earth is under the Lord. Every government, good and bad, evil and unjust, every government is under the Lord. He is the king who reigns over everything. And so at the end of the day, with all of our systems and our structures and our practices and our habits and our policies and our efforts to attain power, if our end goal is being in charge or having people like me, who think like me, who act like me, who love like me, if our goal is having them in charge on our behalf, we will always fall short of our goal. Today, as we look at this gospel of power, we're going to see that this desire to be in control isn't new, and even Jesus had to deal with it with his disciples. If you'd like to follow along, we'll be in Matthew chapter 20. This is on page 1030 in those blue Bibles in front of you or along the wall upstairs. Feel free to use your phones or your own Bibles to look it up as well. Matthew chapter 20. So far leading up to this place, Jesus multiple times, in fact 3 different times, has proclaimed that he's getting ready to die. Now, for a moment, let's pause. The disciples of Jesus followed after him, believing that he was the Messiah. The Messiah was one anointed by God who was coming to rescue the Jewish people and set them free from the evil, heinous, secular government of the Romans over top of them. The Messiah was one who was coming to deliver a new kind of kingdom, a kind of power that would be altogether different from this world. And so for the disciples of Jesus who followed after him, every time he talked about his kingdom, the kingdom of God, they were looking to something here and now. A system of governance, a structure in which God's reign would be supreme and everything would be submitted to that. In which justice would go forth and peace would abound and this earth would look like heaven. This is what they're expecting, and 3 times Jesus promises, I'm about to die. Not just of any ordinary death, I'm about to die a brutal, horrendous death that will leave you utterly shaken. It will leave you completely lost. Now what? If our King can die, what hope is there? And then one of his disciples' moms shows up on the scene. Maybe you're familiar with the story. Here we go. Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 20. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, kneeling before him. She asked him for something. Just a quick pause. Elsewhere, the sons of Zebedee are described as the sons of thunder, which is a pretty cool nickname, to be honest, right? Implying they had this boisterous attitude of power and might. I mean, think of thunder, how it shakes the whole house at times. They were known as those who were the movers and the shakers and the powerful ones who were mighty and great. And their mom comes up on their behalf, which is also kind of a weasel move, right? I don't want to ask, so I'll let my mom do it. Things haven't really changed much. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these 2 sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. I love that request of hers. I desire nothing more than for my own sons and daughter to rise to a position in life far better than my own. And she comes before Jesus and says, I just have one request. Can my sons be in a position of honor and authority at your side? When your kingdom comes, when you ascend to the throne, when you reign and rule, when you have power over everything, can they be there beside you? Your right-hand man, leading and guiding with you. And then Jesus responds, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? They said to him, we are able. Now that language may sound confusing, but if you read a little bit more in the rest of the Gospels, you see that Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, he lifted up a cup during a meal called the Passover, in which they would pour a cup of wine, the cup of Elijah, that is, the cup of God's wrath poured out. And they would leave that cup of wine unconsumed because none of them were able to take the wrath of God. And Jesus took that cup of wrath upon himself. In fact, when he was praying in the garden just a few days after this, as he's sweating blood with the angst of what's to come, he said, Father, if it's your will, take this cup from me. But not my will, yours be done. Jesus says, are you able to bear the wrath of God that I'm about to receive? Are you able to stand in the place of a king who will suffer everything? Are you able to do this? And they don't get it. They don't understand the death he's promised. Are you able to say, oh, of course, we are able. We'll do whatever you ask, Jesus. We'll become whoever you want us to become. We can be that for you. Just put us in that place of power. He said to them, you will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. You will drink my cup. He warns them that the very death he's going to suffer, they will end up dying as well. In fact, for 10 of these 12 disciples, they find their end in brutal means, at the hands of people who kill them specifically because of their connection with Jesus. The cup that they're about to drink is one of martyrdom and death, not one of power and elevation to a place of authority. He goes on to say, and when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. You ever felt that way? Somebody else seems to be rising to a place of authority that you think probably belongs to you. You should be the one who gets the promotion. You should be the one who's in office. You know better than all of these politicians anyway. You should be the one who leads the line at the grocery store when you have no idea what we're shopping for. You should be the one. How dare they? And you throw a temper tantrum and a fit like no other. And you mope about and you groan, I'm indignant. How dare they think they are who they are? If not you, I certainly am this kind of person on a regular basis. But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Every one of us knows this to be true. Those who are in power want nothing more than to remain in power, and those who are not in power want to ascend to power so that they can be in charge. They can make their enemies pay. They can make those who are different from them conform. They can have their way. Jesus says, it should not be like this among you. No, instead, among you, you should be a servant of all. Rather than being elevated to that place of power and authority and the one who gets to make all the decisions, become the least on behalf of everyone else. This is the way of the gospel. It's not the American way. It's not the popular way. In fact, it is not in any way the easy way. But it's the way you and I have been called to come and follow in his footsteps, just as he gave himself as ransom for many. See, this is the beautiful thing about the gospel. We believe in a God who is not looking at you and me with anger and might, saying, fix it or else. He's not waiting for us to screw up. You horrible failure. He's not speaking these sorts of things, condemning us. We have a God who created the entire universe and holds it all in the palm of his hand. And he would set it all down that his hands could be pierced in his side with a spear. He could suffer and he could die. The most heinous and horrible of deaths. And he could do so that you and I might be brought into his kingdom. Enter into his reign and his rule that looks nothing like this world. That is always just and always right and filled with peace in spite of turmoil. A kingdom of joy and hope and all sorts of love. When the world tells us there is no hope and we cannot love. We were made to be in his kingdom, not by those who are elected into office or by those who are in power, but by a king who gave everything up for you and me. Some of you may have noticed, you may have not. Our lighting this morning while we sang the American Gospel was on purpose. Perhaps you noticed there was some red lighting and some blue lighting. And if you notice here in this country, we elevate those who are in the red or those who are in the blue, and one party is better than the other party. But you know what happens when you push the two together? You get purple. And there on the cross, it was illuminated with purple light, the color of the robe that was placed upon Jesus as he was crucified. Purple, a sign of royalty, because you and I know it's not the red and it's not the blue, it's not the left or the right. It is Christ alone who is king. And everything will one day be in submission to him. So when we live in a world that feels unjust and that is unjust, when we see evil people ascending to power, or we see the world not yet being changed into the image we think it should be, despite all the right people in power, whatever it may be, we know this King who's given everything, that we can have life to the fullest. There's a book I read in seminary that was really, really good. It was written by a sociologist whose primary focus was on the sociology of religion. How do religions relate to one another, and people with religious backgrounds relate? And the book was called To Change the World. And it was all an ironic reality about how the right seeks to change the world in accordance with their views, and how the left seeks to change the world in accordance with their views, and how some people seek to change the world by withdrawing altogether and being separate from it. And he writes as a sociologist about how none of these actually have any power to change anything. And then he writes with this term that I found so useful. He said, the way in which we change the world is faithful presence. It's not who's elected and who's in charge. It's not who's on top of the structure or who's on bottom. When you and I, as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, faithfully show up in the lives of one another, in the community around us. We're present with those who disagree with us. We're connected to those that we have nothing in common with. We're present in the lives of those who are hurting and experiencing all sorts of sorrow. When you and I show up and are faithful, faithful to Jesus, faithful to his call to become a servant of all, faithful to the King who gave up everything for you and for me. When we live like that, there will be seasons where those in authority disagree with us on everything, where policies and practices are passed and it doesn't seem to make any sense. There will be seasons when we feel like we have no control over the broader structure of power. And yet, With that faithful presence, we will change the world. See, these disciples, after Jesus rose from the dead, they did not go out to bring a kingdom by might and by power. They went forth with a hope, a new hope that no one could steal, a promise that was always and forever theirs, that they were joined with the King who had conquered even death. And if death had been defeated, what stood against them? Nothing. And with this hope, they lived a life of radical service, of caring for the least of these, of lifting up the poor and the broken, and taking care of those who had nothing. They lived completely unlike the Gentile rulers. And you know what happened? People saw this gospel and they wanted more of it. And they were drawn into this king who gave everything for them. I said, this is the gospel. The good news of peace on earth. So as we end today, let us all return to this gospel. Not one of power and might and authority, but one of sacrifice and service and building others up ahead of ourselves. That we can lead not as the line leader out front, getting all the recognition, but the one who's willing to be in the back, faithfully present in every moment. Not needing all the power for ourselves, but being who God is making us to be, that He each and every day might be lifted high. Not red or blue, but purple, a king on a throne. And one day He will come again, and everything then will be okay. Will you pray with me? God, we confess to You that we are so often like these sons of Zebedee, these sons of thunder. We think highly of ourselves and our ability to sit in positions of power. We think we have the answers and we know the way. God, we confess that we cannot drink Your cup of wrath. We do not know what You will pour out or what is to come. God, we ask that You would make each one of us a servant who would humbly surrender all of our rights and our life for the sake of another, who would exercise the power of faithful presence to be with those who do not know You, to be with those whose lives look nothing like the life You've promised, to be with those who think and act and believe entirely different than we do. May we be faithful in our presence, to love and to serve and to give to the least of these, that we may see Your kingdom come and Your will be done. And now, Lord, we pray as You taught us to pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.